Hey everybody, and welcome to this third tutorial, which is all about Redux. Now we're gonna steal a little bit of the Redux package, a little bit of the react-redux one, put it all together so we can use this great state management in our React applications. By the time I'm recording this video, two tutorials are already online, so the Create React app and React Router. So if you have any feedback about those, if you've watched them, please share it with me. It would mean a lot. Okay, now this being said, let's jump into the code and see what we want to steal actually. So I got here the editor opened up, and let's go on the GitHub repo of the StealLikeADev series, and here in the React Redux folder I have the README, which is just the parts that I stole. So in this video we're going to do create store and combine reducers. In the next one, we're going to do the connect and provider components. I mean, the connect function and the provider component. By the end of the next video, we're going to put the code we have into a React application, see that it actually works. And in the third one, we're going to be stealing the effect side. That's a little bit more technical, so I'm going to leave that one on its own. Cool. Now, going back to this one. So we're going to steal this function right here, create store, and this one right here, combine reducers. So let's look a little bit at create store. It receives the first parameter, which is a reducer function. The second parameter, which is optional, it can be the preloaded state. I've actually used this in DevDrive, an application I'm working on the side. I want to show some data as fast as possible. So when you go to the server for the index.html, I insert into the HTML a script with the preloaded state from the server, so that on the client I can just read the preloaded state without, a new GET request or something like that. So this preloaded state is actually pretty useful. And the enhancer part, we're gonna leave this one for the third video. Okay, so let's go in here and say export function create store, and it's going to receive the reducer, and it's possibly going to receive the preloaded state, and the enhancer we're going to leave for last. Now this one's got to return the store object, and that one's got to have a few properties. So here we're going to return something which has a dispatch function, right? A function which has get state, and a subscribe one. Now, actually, before I write any more code, a little bit about the idea behind it. Basically, our components are going to subscribe to this store. We're going to be using the same observer pattern that we've used in React Router. The components are going to subscribe to this store. Whenever there's a new action dispatched, the state changes. All the components who listen to, who are subscribed actually to the state change, get notified, and voila, our UI updates. And I also want to have an unsubscribe function. So this is pretty much what I want to return, right? Now, so this is going to be our store. This is how we're going to access our data and interact with it. So here, let me just put a variable, state is. And at first we're gonna go ahead and say reducer, and we're gonna pass as first parameter of the reducer is the current state, let's say, in our case the preloaded state if we have any, and then the action is gonna be like this. Basically we have no action like the default one with type undefined. Cool. Now let's write those functions. So get state should return state. Nothing fancy here. Dispatch, well, actually let's do subscribe first. So when I want to subscribe to the store, again, the observer pattern, I'm going to be passing a callback. So I'm going to have here a list of listeners, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to subscribe with this function. Let's first check if it exists. So, is listeners.find, and they say existing callback, and I'm gonna return existing callback equals to callback. And if it doesn't exist, then I'm gonna be say listeners.push callback. Right? So if you try to subscribe with the same function, well, the same exact function, I'm not gonna let you. That function is already listening. So this is what I'm doing with this, if it exists. And if it doesn't exist, I'm gonna push the callback. Cool. Now, I also want to unsubscribe, and to be honest, you know, there are two different patterns here. One would be you have a subscribe and an unsubscribe function for, well, unsubscribing. A second pattern I've seen is to subscribe. The subscribe function returns an unsubscribe. So you subscribe, and then the result, the return of that function is another function which you use to unsubscribe. I hope that makes sense. I kind of want to mix the two approaches. Maybe in some place you gotta hang on to that function to unsubscribe. In other places you can use the separate unsubscribe function. So I'm gonna go ahead and let's write unsubscribe first. And then say I want to unsubscribe with this callback, and we're going to go ahead and say, let's find its index is listeners.index of callback, and say if index of is different than -1. So if it exists, I'm going to go ahead and say listeners.splice minus index of and 1. So I want to remove that element from the array. But yeah, basically we remove it from the listeners array, and that's it. Now I also want to do here, now the unsubscribe is going to return a function, so you can use this separate function right here if you have the callback which you used in the first place. If you don't have that callback, just hang on to this result, which is gonna say unsubscribe of callback. Yeah, and by using this here, this should work, but maybe if you bind this or something like that. Yeah, I don't really want to be using this here. Maybe maybe the way you're gonna change this, or actually this being an arrow function. Yeah, actually this is not good at all. This is an arrow function. It doesn't have its this. It's gonna be the this of this function. So the this of subscribe. If you call subscribe a little bit with a different this, it's not gonna work. So let me just declare here, just so we're 100% sure, function unsubscribe. And I'm gonna copy this block here. Here I'm just gonna leave the name and remove this. Cool. Again, why I don't want to be using this is because this can change, can vary depending on how you call the function. So I don't want to take any chances. So I'm not going to use this. Cool. Now, what do we have until now? We have the get state, we have the subscribe, which if the callback doesn't exist, pushes it to the listeners. We return a function to unsubscribe the current callback. We also have a function here to unsubscribe any callback, so that's good. And we need to do the dispatch. But before I do this, let me just write here another line of code, which is gonna say callback of state. We're gonna be calling the subscribed function, so the observer functions with the current state. And I wanna call it right away after you subscribe because, you know, basically you subscribe, so I want to give you what state already exists there. So you don't have to do a subscribe and then a get state separately. And now the dispatch. Well, the dispatch is going to be receiving an action to dispatch, and I'm going to go ahead and say state is equal to reducer of action. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Yeah, so for the create store, nothing fancy, basically the observer pattern with, you know, the specific sides of Redux, which are, we modify the state via actions and reducers, which are pure functions, return a new state, and we override the old state with the new state. But because we're implementing actually the create store one, we don't really need to care about, you know, how the reducers work, because that's going to be the developer's job. Cool. So we got this one going. Now let's go ahead here, and I guess we can, well, let's test it. Let's do combine reducers, and then we can test it. Or actually, we're gonna test it in the second one, because I think the code is pretty straightforward. But if you want to test what we've done until now, you can just copy this to-dos reducer here, and like basically copy this code snippet, use the create store we just did, and it should work. Actually, you know what? Why don't we do that just so we make sure? So I'm gonna go ahead and say function to-dos, store is create store. Let's move this here and just comment this one, copy everything, go ahead in the console, paste everything. Cannot read type of undefined at line 38, which is here. To-dos. So we got the to-dos, we create a store, and then we dispatch, and dispatch says reducer of action, and that action is undefined. Let me just well, you know what we can do actually. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead. So this one is going to be undefined. Then when we dispatch here, create store, to-dos. Oh, of course. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, it's good that we tested it, you see? I didn't want to test it because I was pretty sure it was going to work, but I was mistaken. Yeah, the reducer needs the previous state as the first parameter. So we got to go here and say state and then action. And now if we copy everything, well, the store has already been declared. Let's refresh the page because it has, I think it's got let. And yeah, you see it works. So we had use Redux, the initial state, and then we dispatched a new action to add a new entry, read the docs, and we have both of them right here. Cool, so yeah, we had a bug, we're very happy I tested it. Now let's remove this to-dos right here, and all this last part, let's put the export here, and go ahead and actually do the combine reducers one. So I'm gonna say export function combine reducers, and I'm gonna go ahead and say what does it have. So our combine reducers right here, it's got only one property, one parameter, which is a reducers object. So basically the idea behind it is our state is gonna be separate, it's gonna have a lot of, you know, inner values, or okay, let's go again. Our state is going to be made up of a lot of information about different stuff. Maybe we have information about the current user, which is logged in. Maybe we have information about the teams that user is part of. And then we have some information about some exercises that user, you know, did or whatever. And in the entire state, which is an object, we have like different fields, maybe a user field, maybe a teams field, and then they have their own inner state. So this might be a way you would organize your state just so you keep it all manageable, and, you know, basically it's an object with properties. And in big Redux apps, you might want to split your reducers. So I'm going to have my teams reducers, my user reducers, my exercise reducers, and I want to combine them kind of like, okay, the user's property from the entire state, that's the user reducer dealing with that. Then the team's property, well, that's the job of the team's reducer, and so on. And the way to combine them, so basically to put all those reducers together into one and create our entire state, is via the function combine reducers. as you see right here in this example, if I zoom in from this is again stolen from the original Redux, right? I'm gonna have a potato reducer and a tomato reducer, and this outputs the state down below, with each property managed by its own reducer. It's basically a way to keep our code more separate and easy to manage. So we're gonna have here a reducers object, and I want to what? Return a function, right? Turns an object into a single reducing function. So I still want to have just one reducer, which is of course a function, which accepts the state and an action as the parameters. So let's go ahead and say, and now basically we want to create the new state. So I'm going to go ahead and say the new state is an object. In case of combined reducers, we expect an object with properties. So that's where we start from. And I'm going to iterate through our reducers. And then I have for each key, I want to say new state of key is equal to reducers of key. And then we call this specific reducer with the state, but not the entire state, just the part of the state which is managed by itself. So state of key and then action. Right? And finally return new state. Cool. So, right, we iterate for all its keys. For each key in our reducers object, we populate that specific key in the new state. We put everything together in the new state object and return it. Yeah, this pretty much should be it. Let me just, let's actually test it. So we make sure this is good. I'm going to put some comments in here and create store to-dos, and we're going to let's get some to-dos, and let's get another one to-dos, and we'll call this users, and add user, and then store.concat action.username. Okay. So we got two reducers, one for to-dos, one for users. Our state is going to be an object with those two properties, each one being an array. And here we're going to say const root reducer is equal to combine reducers. And here we're going to say to-dos and users. Okay. We're going to pass this root reducer to our state. The initial state is going to be like this: to-dos nothing, users nothing. And I want to say, okay, add another to-do, read the docs, add an user with the username being Bob, and then output the entire state. And we should actually see, the state, which has the form like this. In to-dos, we're going to have one string, in users, one string, and each reducer is managing that part. Yeah, let's just comment the export keywords because they're not going to work in the console. Copy paste everything, open the console. I'm sorry that I'm doing it like this quick and dirty way, but we're going to test it more thoroughly at the end of the second video when I'm actually going to put this in a real app I've built so that we see it works with like real production code. So I refresh the page. Let me zoom in the console, copy paste everything, enter, and you see to-dos has got read the docs, users has got Bob. Yeah, so I guess this is pretty much it for the first video, trying to keep them a little bit shorter, so I'm going to stop here. And as you see, when I first started learning Redux, maybe 2.5 years ago, I think, or 2 years ago, yeah, it seemed a little bit, all the explanations online were like a little bit more difficult to understand, like what's a reducer. I know what a pure function was, but like a reducer and the actions and like a new state, I was like, what is going on? But when I actually started using it, I realized, well, hold on a minute, it's not that complicated. It's kind of like the observer pattern. We got one big place where we keep the state. We modify the state in a certain way. that's pretty much it, and we listen to changes. So yeah, create, store, and combine reducers are done. No React things yet in this tutorial. In the next one though, we're going to be implementing connect and provider, and actually put all this code in a real production React application. Yeah, so see you in the next video. Cheers.